Greetings, old school magic players, and welcome to the Four Horsemen.
Greetings, old school magic players, and welcome to the Four Horsemen. On a Friday afternoon, we're going to be covering some Tournament 13 semifinals matches. I'm joined here today with John Eckleberry. Hey, John, how's it going?
Hello. Here we are again.
Back at it for the fans. Check us out at fourhorsemenmagic.com, facebook.com/group/fourhorsemenmtg. And if you want to learn more about the tournament number 13, just go to the tournament 13 section under fourhorsemenmagic.com. You can check out all the details there. Quick reminder on this tournament. This was our spring tournament and wrapped this up several months back. And we did our updated Banned and Restricted, so there's been a lot of new decks with this tournament. And we'll get into the brackets here. We had a ton of players in this tournament. This is the first tournament where we've ended up having to do a top 16 and then breaking down to top 8 in the quarterfinals from there. So that was pretty cool. And today, John and I are going to be covering the match Philip versus Peter. And these two guys have been with us at the Four Horsemen since the very beginning. Philip hasn't played in all the tournaments, but he's certainly played in a majority of them. And Peter's played in a ton of them and is the undisputed and undefeated champion. We call him Peter the King Suleiman Soltez. So this is a really interesting matchup here, Philip versus Peter. John, you ready to get into these decks?
Let's do it.
Okay. For Peter's deck, Peter's running an Unstable Ooze deck. If you've watched any of the prior videos, you may have seen Peter come up through the ranks here. And Philip is also running an interesting deck that Peter helped him work on and improve and tweak. He's run several different versions of Land Tax, Land's Edge over the tournaments, and he's been incrementally improving and modifying this deck. So it's really cool to see the tweaks and the changes and the improvements over time. And so Philippe's going to be running his Tax Edge Lightning deck. All right, John, let's get into the deck photos and do some reviews here. This is an interesting take for Peter, who's not necessarily done a ton of combo decks. What do you think of Peter's Unstable Ooze deck here, John?
Can you share your screen with me?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. 1 second. Boom. There you go.
There it is. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a cool concept. We just covered another video that had a red-blue aggro deck, and I mentioned that perhaps Unstable Ooze could be good in that shell, and this is a fairly similar build to that, although Peter's done a few different things here. He's not playing any Serendib Ifrits this month, which is interesting. You've seen some other decks move away from that as well. He's just playing the Ghost Ships and the Azure Drakes, as was I in this tournament. And he's also got additional Old Mans in the sideboard for a 3-drop if he decides that he wants to have a 3-drop. Yeah, other than that, he's kind of relying on that early combo of either getting an Ooze or Flying Man and getting an Unstable Mutation on it early.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cool tweaks that Peter has thrown in here, including the telekinesis, which, I think early on you also tinkered with telekinesis, the blue instant, double blue, and it taps a creature and it stays tapped for basically 3 turns. That card can be very powerful deal with blockers and get your damage in, and it's an instant, not an enchantment. So it's a really interesting, kind of unique card.
Yeah, I picked one up when we did our Pauper event, because it's later was recategorized as a common in one of the later sets, probably one of the online sets. So I ran it in my Pauper build, but it's kind of interesting. We've talked about how something like Ghost Ship can just really gum up the board, and bring things to a standstill. But if they can just tap your good blocker for like 3 turns and beat in, that might be game right there.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing that Peter's got going on here that's very thoughtful, as Peter always is with all of his decks, is juxtapose. He's got a couple of juxtapose from Legends there, which allows you to basically swap your creatures with your opponent's creatures, or enchantments or artifacts. What do you think about the inclusion of juxtapose here?
Yeah, it's really cool. You can give away an unstable ooze to them and kind of hurt them that way, or you can just give away any low casting cost guy and take their best thing. Maybe give them a flying man and take whatever big creature they're playing. Probably not a Triskelion. That kind of messes up the combo a little bit, because they would just use the fire off the arms and kill your little guys before the juxtapose resolves. So that can be a little bit of a problem. But other than Triskelion, it's a pretty neat little trick to steal stuff. And you can also swap artifacts too, although I don't think Peter has any artifacts in this deck, does he? I don't think he has a single one, so that card certainly won't be swapping artifacts in this match.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the primary combo in this deck. This is not a new combo. Certainly, we've seen this before, and other folks on other old school groups and channels have talked about the Primordial Ooze and Unstable Mutation combo. But just real quickly, let's take a look at Unstable Ooze. Let me switch over. I'm going to share my Gatherer screen here. So it's a 1 red casting cost creature, and it's 1/1, and it must it attacks each combat if able. So it's got to attack. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Ooze, and then you may pay X, where X is the number of +1 counters on it. If you don't, you tap the Primordial Ooze and it deals X damage to you. So, this card really will lock up your mana, and you don't have to pay the X to grow it. You could keep it as you could pay the mana if it's got the counters, or if you don't, it's gonna tap and damage you. So I think the inclusion of juxtapose with this card is also really clever, because as your Primordial Ooze gets really big, it's gonna eat up all your mana, a lot of your mana. And you could actually, if you could trade, with a flying man or another small creature, this Primordial Ooze, which has this pretty significant upkeep drawback to it.
Yeah, that's right. You can pass it on to them and force them to pay. If you haven't gotten lucky enough to lock your combo down early.
Right.
If you do get the combo, it's pretty neat, because you get the Ooze down turn 1, and then turn 2 at the upkeep, you get 1 counter, you pay for it, and then you drop that Unstable Mutation on it. And that the way that current Magic rulings work, +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters cancel each other out. So during subsequent upkeeps, you would get a +1/+1, but you would also get a -1/-1 from the Unstable Mutation, and then they would both just drop off. So you've basically got a 5/5 for your 2 mana that you only have to pay 1 upkeep on, just for that single counter that's on there already. It's a pretty good rate.
Yeah, it really is. It's super mana efficient. And I tinkered with this a few tournaments back, to see how it played, and you have to be careful, because you you really have to make sure that your opponent doesn't have any blockers or doesn't have, ways to deal with your unstable ooze, because it's going to lock up that mana pretty quick. You're going to get that first counter on the first turn, so then it'll have an upkeep of 1, and it'll be a 2/2 with a 1 upkeep. And assuming you get your combo, you need a red and a blue mana source. You put the unstable on it on that turn 2. Now it becomes a 5/5 on turn 2 that has a current upkeep of 1, and you can hit in for 5 damage on turn 2. So it's really strong. But then the next turn, you got to put the other counter, and now you've got to pay 2 mana. So at this point, if you really play it out like that, first turn, second turn, you're only going to have 1 mana left over. And if you miss a mana drop, you miss a land drop, then all your mana is actually tied up in paying the upkeep on the unstable ooze. So it's a very delicate combo to play if you're not careful. And what I found in my testing was it's better to play the unstable ooze on like turn 3, or once you've got 3 mana rather, so that you can still draw into more mana and you don't end up tying up all your mana in the upkeep or taking damage from it yourself. All right, so let's see what else has Peter got going on in his deck here. The Old Man of the Sea and the Falling Stars are also extremely valuable tech. He's got the ever-present Sylvan Library, a single Detonate, and a single Amnesia. What do you think of these splash cards, plus the 2 boomerangs and the 1 mana drain?
I mean, they're pretty solid. I like Detonate as artifact removal because it also does damage, so that's pretty good. If he runs up against another deck like his that's not running artifacts, he can just side the single copy out. If they do have them, he can bring the other one in. Blood Moon's pretty good in this format with everybody trying to run multiple colors. Of course, the Hoser cards are good. Flood's good, but it's funny, we haven't really seen it show up much other than in the Pauper months. But it's pretty solid. I mean, I like it in this deck because he can tap down little blockers and get in with his large ooze or whatever else he's got. And then of course Amnesia. I mean, you only really need to hit him once with an Amnesia to really knock them off their game. So I think it's fine to just play 1 or 2 copies of that. I think it might be overkill to have more than that.
Yeah, and speaking of the sideboard here, you pointed out the Blood Moons in the sideboard. The 4 active volcanoes. What we're not seeing here is the 4 flash floods. Instead, Peter opted for 4 Dandans because blue is so prevalent in the Four Horsemen that Dandan is a really tempting and powerful Arabian Nights card that can just it can't attack unless your opponent controls islands, but it's a 4/1 for 2 blue, so it can really do a lot of damage on the ground early in the game.
And it's funny, I don't think that I played Flash Flood this month either in my board. It comes in and out. It's a good hate card, especially if there's a lot of red in the meta, but the previous month I had run it, and it just kind of felt like I never really used it much.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't as good as it could have been, so I just thought maybe it'd be better served to play something else in those slots, and apparently Peter felt that same way in this tournament too. But it's all really cyclical, because then in the next tournament or the one after that, you might see people running Flash Flood again. It really kind of depends. I mean, I think we're all kind of seasoned by the decks that we run up against as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because we might just get paired against certain things and not others, and then you kind of shape the way that you're building decks for the format. You may or may not have a blind spot to certain things, or you might get to a match where you're like, wow, I wish I had those Flash Floods. Or you might go the whole tournament and think, wow, I'm glad I didn't waste those 4 slots because I never really needed one.
Right. Yeah, it's true. The other card,
but the Active Volcano seems pretty universally good because there's just so many good blue cards going around.
Oh yeah, I mean, Active Volcano, it's a common, right? And it's something that we threw away as kids. But in Four Horsemen, it's such a powerful card because it just takes out any blue. Now it doesn't deal with the ghost ships because of the regeneration, but pretty much everything else. It's a fantastic card. So, um, of course, Peter's running 4 of those. The other card that Peter's running in his main deck, which you could also be a good sideboard card, is the Falling Star, and we're seeing Falling Star played more and more to deal with ground greenies and fast attacking decks, as well as to tap creatures so that you can get through on your attack. All right, so Peter's deck, Unstable Ooze, really cool build, right down the alley with the blue-red strategies that Peter's been playing in many of his other decks, and it's taken him all the way to the semifinals. And our reigning champion.
So the last thing I'll say about Peter's deck before we go look at the other deck is that if he really wants to be sneaky and they have an artifact that he really wants, and he has his factory out, he could activate the factory to turn it into an artifact creature, and then swap it for whatever artifact they've got out that he wants to have with that juxtapose.
Yeah, juxtapose is very, very interesting because it's such a like, I don't know, typical Four Horsemen card that you never see played any other time or in any other format. But the text on it, it's a sorcery. It costs a blue and 3. You and target player exchange control of the creature you each control with the highest mana value. So whatever your creature with the highest mana value, you're going to exchange control of those. So you're right here. Your mana value on your factory would be 0, right? So if it's a creature exchange, you could swap your factory for their Triskelion or something like that, or whatever.
Well, actually, so now that you're reading through it, I actually think my hypothesis is bad, because if you activate the factory and you've got a 0-cost guy, you'd have to swap that as your creature rather than as your artifact. I was hoping that you could switch one of your creatures, and then in the second clause, you swap artifacts in the same way, that you could then swap that for one of their artifacts, but you'd actually have to trade it as a creature, which you wouldn't really want to do most of the time.
Yeah, in that factory scenario, it's you'd be giving up your factory probably for something big, like an Urnum Djinn or a Juzum Djinn or something, a Triskelion or something. But if the Triskelion were to be targeted, then it can fire off its arm, so you probably actually wouldn't ever make that trade. I really think that Juxtapose is in Peter's deck specifically to hand off your unruly Unstable Ooze. Once it gets too big and you're paying 5 or upkeep, well, you just hand it to your opponent, and now they have to pay 5 every turn, or they take that damage. Meanwhile, if you have Ghost Ship in play, you don't care if they have this big giant unstable. You just block and regenerate. So, but when it comes to artifacts, the rest of the juxtapose says after you do the creature exchange, then it says then exchange control of artifacts in the same way. If 2 or more permanents that a player controls are tied for the highest, then their controller chooses one of them. So if there's a tie, then whoever controls it gets to pick. So tricky card, intricate card, and very much part of the strategy here in Peter's deck to be able to it allows him an out to deal with a problematic unstable Ooze. All right, so let's take a look at Philippe's deck. Philippe is running a Tax Edge Lightning deck, and like I said earlier in the intro, he's run many iterative and different versions. He's been improving on this deck over time. John, what do you think of this latest build?
It's pretty solid and pretty focused. We went over this in our last video, but I like that he's honed in on having the 10-1 drops and making sure that he gets out a guy early and then just kind of paper cuts them for damage as they're struggling to decide whether or not to play into the land tax, strategy or not. And at some point, they don't really have a choice. They have to they have to get their deck moving. Otherwise, they're just going to die from these little 1/1s. And then that forces them into his strategy. And then, of course, he can just pop off a land tax and kill you.
Yeah.
I think this deck's pretty strong. It is interesting, though, that we, you know, when you look at the format from the outside and you haven't played it, you might just say, oh, well, the tax edge, that just is going to win all the time, right? But, like, we've never actually had tax edge win any of our tournaments. I guess it remains to be seen for the viewer if it wins this one, if it wins tournament 13 as we're covering these. But it is a good deck. I don't know. Like I like his choices. I know that Peter and him worked a bit on it together. Like with this interesting tech with the cleansing in the sideboard. It really is pretty neat. That we also kind of talked a bit about in the last video. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's very solid.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you made there, John. If we go back and look at the tournament decks, which you can do, you can look at all the tournament photos. Just go to fourhorsemenmagic.com, go to tournaments, and you can see all the tournament deck photos shared there, all the way from tournament 1 to present. And there's also a tournament deck photos compilation. So if you go back and look through those, you'll see people have been trying Land's Edge, tax edge, with land tax since tournament number 1.
All the way back. My very first opponent in tournament number 1 was playing a build somewhat like this, although instead of focusing on the small creatures, he also included black in the deck and was using Underworld Dreams in conjunction with Winds of Change to try to do a bunch of damage to the opponent.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of an interesting strategy. I mean, it's a little mana heavy and greedy because, you got the triple black spell and the double red spell and, also white cards that you want to get out early. But it was still pretty cool. I really liked it. And we have seen it in most tournaments since then.
Yeah. It's made an appearance in every tournament along the way. And, folks have been trying it out because you're right. It does seem on the surface to be a really fantastic, lock. It's guaranteed to win kind of thing. And we've seen folks play it with Rook Egg and Winds of Change, running things like all the major damage, like Falling Star and Pyrotechnics and Chain Lightnings, stuff like that. What I think is really interesting about Philippe's build here is that he's included those early one drop creatures. That I really think is the differentiator for this deck. You've got the 4 Tundra Wolves in the upper left there. That's 4 Brass Man. He's got a couple proxies, I think, there. Tundra Wolves are a 1/1 first strike for 1. They're not great by themselves, but with other cards like Bloodlust or Chain Lightning, they can be pretty effective. In the Brass Man is a 1/3 for 1. I mean, he can block Mishra's Factories and any thing like Gasman Ogre or things like that. Early creatures that are on the ground, but mainly he can get in for damage. And he can operate on 1 mana. Then he's got a couple, the Clergy of the Holy Nimbus. Those guys are really cool. I should probably show those cards real quick, because the Holy Nimbus card is not seen very often. I think it's a common from the Dark, right, John? One of your favorite? Oh no, it's from the Legends. It's from Legends.
Legends, yeah. I think he probably just determined that it was the next best 1-drop. Because we're stretching here because we don't have ABU cards to play with, right? And so, we're trying to use the best of the rest.
Yeah, that's right.
And he could be, I had mentioned in the previous video, you could maybe play Miracle Worker in that slot as well if you were worried about spraying auras on your guys. But I like the Clergy fine. I think it's a cool little card. I think it's neat that it regenerates if they don't have the mana to pay or, want to pay.
Yeah.
And it's got cool art. It's neat.
Yeah. Yeah, the good thing about it is that, like, if they try to do something to it and you have mana open, you can regenerate it, and that forces your opponent, unless your opponent pays 1, right? The opponent has to pay that mana there, not you. So if it forces the land tax trigger, which I think is very ingenious and innovative. And just looking really quickly at Land's Edge, I'm going to show Land's Edge here. This is a world enchantment, so you can only have 1 in play at any given time, but 2 red and 1, and you discard a card at random, and that activates the Land's Edge. And if the card was discarded was a land, then Land's Edge deals 2 damage to target creature, and they've updated it to to target 2 damage to target player or planeswalker. They added planeswalkers in the errata on this, and any player may activate that ability. So that's the combo there that gets the damage in. But the trick is Phillips getting in that early damage so that he can pull ahead with his 1/1s and 1-drops. The other card we should look at is Land Tax. Classic Legends enchantment. Brian Snoddy art, just really cool. Everybody knows this card. It's only costs 1. It's probably the most powerful white enchantment in the format left, since Moat was banned. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them and put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So, this card allows the interoperability between Land Tax and Land's Edge, and this is a combo that everybody in Old School knows. But some of these other cards, like, for example, along the bottom here, you've got Yidwin of Freet. This is a card that other folks have started to tinker with in Four Horsemen, but here, Phillips included 2 of these in the main deck. What do you think of the inclusion of the Yidwin of Freet, John?
I don't know. I think, again, it's probably just was the next best option. Like, he's playing those ball lightnings, and he wanted, another 2 or 3 drop that he could get in here, and he felt like, perhaps that was just good because it's pretty resilient. I mean, it's a 3/6 for 3, which makes it pretty good, and very hard to kill. It can attack with no issue. You have to flip a coin for it to block, but who cares? You're playing red. You're probably not blocking.
Right. Exactly.
So I don't know. I like the card. It's a card that I would probably play 4 of in Big Red if I was playing. I might build a Big Red deck for the next tournament, but or perhaps one to test out in the Summer League that just started. But yeah, I like it. I think it's pretty good. It's funny, in the last video I was like, oh, he should side that out in this match, and he didn't. And then he played one and he killed the guy with it. And I was like, well, there you go.
That's right. Yeah. It's just a really cool card. It's an Arabian Nights card. And, there's the Yidwin of Freet, and there's the other one that was reprinted and revised. The Mahide Djinn, I think, is what the other one is. Something like that. And, like John pointed out, this one has no disadvantage on attacking, only if you decide to block with it. So, really cool card. And of course, Ball Lightning is in here too. We haven't really talked about Ball Lightning very much, but Ball Lightning is actually also very central to the strategy of this deck, because it, it's like it's getting in for 6 damage for 3 red if your opponent doesn't have a blocker. It has trample, it has haste, and it's a 6/1 for 3 that's sacrificed at the end step. So, that card is also central to the strategy of getting in for early damage, and then once you play Land's Edge, even if your opponent does have some lands in their hand, it won't, you're not going to be chancing a tie or anything like that. So, you basically, you lock it in with these early 1/1 and 6/1 creatures, the Ball Lightnings, Tundra Wolves, Brassman, and those Clergy. John, what do you think of the sideboard here for Phillips' Tax Edge Lightning sideboard?
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's got the volcanic islands that we discussed before, the blood moons a lot of people are playing. I think those cleansings are super cool that we covered in the last video. Those make you either pay 1 life per land or sack the lands. and so he can get in some extra direct damage that way. King Suleiman's great because there's Ifrits and Jinns all over the place in this format. And then of course Divine Offering is our version of Disenchant. Very good. The only thing that I was really thinking about when I was looking at this list when you were talking is that like you said, the entire strategy is to get in for some early damage so that when the tax edge comes down, you're able to finish them off. You don't have to necessarily worry about doing all 20 damage there. You've already done some. And I feel like the one card that kind of sticks out to me looking at this list today is the Spirit Link. It's like you really don't want them gaining any life. I mean, I understand why it's here because it's kind of the substitute for something like a Swords, that you could play early and incapacitate something that might knock you off your strategy or kill you. But it does seem a little bit strange because you don't really care about the life gain, right? Like, I mean, I guess it's fine just to stop one of their bigger creatures or whatever. It's not going to stop them from blocking with it, though. It's not like it's not going to remove it from combat or tap it or whatever. It's just going to sit there, and then they're kind of going to have an eternal blocker that they can still block your little guy, chump block your little guys and kill them. You'll gain life, but like they don't really care as long as they're not dying. Like same thing with the Ivory Tower here. Like it's cool, and you might be able to gain a lot of life with the getting a bunch of lands in your hand with the tax edge. But like, do you need it? Like, I don't know that it plays into the really aggressive strategy of the deck. Like, I mean, maybe it's just good to outlast people that have flying or have some kind of evasion against you or somehow pull ahead of you to make sure that if you get in a Land's Edge war, you kill them and you don't die. But I don't know. They seem like somewhat non-aggressive cards to be playing in an otherwise very aggressive deck.
Yeah, those are all very, very fair points, and I've been flashing up the cards here for the viewers. The Ivory Tower gaining life. Do you really need to gain life? I have to agree with you. I don't think Ivory Tower belongs in the main deck. It could be a potential sideboard deck, but he should be going in for more damage. Even something like a Pyrotechnics to me. I know you're probably not going to get to the 5 damage, but maybe even the additional Bloodlust, like a 4th Bloodlust or a 3rd Clergy, to me would be better than the Ivory Tower. However, a first turn Ivory Tower allows you to just sit there and play your plateau or your plains, and you just gain life until you get your land tax down, and then you can tax and gain even more life. So it's another combo angle to put you in position of dominance, so that your Land's Edge becomes even more powerful. Real quickly, I wanted to look at the cleansing because we haven't really talked about cleansing since one of our earlier matches, but I've got cleansing up here on the Gatherer. This is another card that's hardly ever played. It's rarely seen, but it costs 3 white. It's a sorcery. It's from the Dark, John's favorite set. Art by Peter Vinters, and for its text it's been simplified since it was originally printed. It just says, for each land, destroy that land unless any player pays 1 life. So what this allows you to do is, it is triple white, but that's not a problem if you have land tax. But it allows you to destroy all lands, and then you force your opponent to pay life to keep their land. So it's another way to get damage into them, and it combos with land tax. So you can let your 1 or 2 lands be destroyed, so you fall under your opponent's land count, and it allows you to trigger your land tax, which is really cool. So, in summary, looking at this deck, it's highly tweaked, and Philippe's worked really hard on this, and hats off to Philippe. I know he's done a lot of testing. the only card we haven't really talked about now is Winds of Change. Now, you could argue, and Brian Weissman in some of our early commentaries in tournaments 1, 2, and 3, he talked quite a bit about how Winds of Change is not an extremely good card. It's like a mediocre card in some scenarios. John, let's talk about Winds of Change real quick before we get into the match, because I think that you were mentioning key points about what you might tweak. Winds of Change is another questionable card here, in addition to the Ivory Tower for me. What do you think about Winds of Change being included?
I like it. I don't know if you need to play all 4, but I like the card. I like that you can cycle all those lands that you got for potential threats by shuffling them back into your deck. I also like that you knock your opponent off of whatever their hand was and give them a fresh random hand of cards that can sometimes, mess with their game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it definitely belongs in this deck. But you could maybe cut one, and play something else. You probably don't need 4.
Yeah, I definitely think that we don't need 4. And, just for the viewers, the Winds of Change is a sorcery for 1 from Legends. Each player shuffles the cards from their hand, however many they have, into their library and draws that same number of cards. So if you've got 5 cards and your opponent's got 3, you're drawing 5. Obviously, this works very well with land tax, which allows you to get a bunch of lands, and you can hold those lands in your hand. But what's interesting is what I found, because I've played Tax Edge before, John, and what I found was I was shuffling a lot of lands back into my deck, and then when you play Winds of Change, and it's really kind of shocking how many lands you end up drawing, because you're putting those lands back in. It's not like you're removing those lands from the deck. So you still have a random probability of drawing lands which you already had in your hand. And what I found when I was playing Winds of Change was, let's say I've got 4 cards I want to keep and 3 lands in my hand, right? And I play Winds of Change as my, because I drew for the turn. I'm gonna draw 7 new cards, and you might end up with I don't know, 1 extra card and 2 less land. Is that really worth it for an entire card and playing something on your turn? What I found when I was playing Tax Edge was Winds of Change was really frustrating to me. I mean, I found it to be kind of not optimal.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of games when you're playing Land's Edge where you just have, 6 or 7 lands in your hand and nothing else. I mean, I feel like Winds of Change is pretty good.
That's right. That's when it's good.
I guess if you're not in that situation, or if you're drawing extra copies of it, or it just you draw, but you draw the same junk that you already had. I mean,
right.
certainly it's random. It's not always going to be great, but I still do think it belongs.
Yeah. What I would do is, if I were to make changes, I think I would cut back to 2 Winds of Change, and I would move the Ivory Tower to the sideboard, and I would double down on more damage. I would put in the extra Bloodlust, and maybe even something like the Detonate to get in damage. I mean, a lot of people are running artifacts, or maybe even double down on the Clergy, right? I think that the protectionist life-gaining concept with the tower is just not good for the main deck. I think it's a great sideboard card, so that would be my recommendation. Pull out 2 Winds of Change and 1 Ivory Tower, put in 1 more Bloodlust and 2 more Clergy. I think would be a good tweak for this deck.
I think it's really interesting with cleansing that any player can play for any land, so you wouldn't necessarily want to do it most of the time. But if they had, I don't know, Mirror out or something, and they were going to swap life totals with you, you could play a cleansing, and you could just pay a whole bunch of life to keep all the lands in play on both sides. I don't know. It's strange. It's strange, some of these old cards, when you look at them, the way that they actually function.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I mean, this is obviously a very powerful build, and I'm not trying to diminish you know the tweaks that Philippe has made whatsoever. You know, I just think that there are a couple of things that could be modified to make it even more powerful. All right, so
Yeah, I think this deck's really strong though.
yeah,
I'm
it's
excited to go into the match and see what it does against Peter's deck.
yeah, it's super strong. I mean, it wouldn't be in these semifinals if it weren't. And you know, this is also a really like pivotal match, right? I mean, number one, this is Philippe, who's played in many tournaments. He's never made first place. Actually, I did think he made first place once, didn't he? Way back. I think he did.
If he did, it would have been tournament 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think it was one of the very early tournaments because well, but he doesn't have the playmat. He's got his own playmat, so
maybe he won tournament 2. I think he did either did well or won one of those ones.
yeah.
Because I won 3 and Matt Mesa won 4, and then Peter just went on a tear and won, you know, several in a row after that. So
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the match. Hopefully, everyone's enjoyed this lengthy commentary. You know, these are two really powerful decks, so we really wanted to give them a thorough deck review. And John, if you're ready, we can get into the match now.
Yeah, let's do the match. Let's take a look.
All right, so we're going to be playing this at 1.5 speed, and on the count of 3, John, we're ready to go. 1, 2, 3. Now, we didn't mention that this match is in person.
Yeah, it's always nice in a otherwise webcam format to occasionally be able to meet up with somebody and play one of your games in person. I think that's super cool. Peter's gotten to do it a couple of times. For whatever reason, we have a number of Canadians in this league, which we've talked about in other.
Well, I think a lot of that credit is due to Peter, right? I mean, Peter.
Sure.
Apparently, Peter his first stumble into old school magic was the Four Horsemen, and he's talked a lot about that in some of his other videos that he's done with us in commentary. And then he expanded into other formats like Alpha 40 and X Points and different things. But he's been a loyal and faithful supporter because this was, interestingly and curiously, like the first old school format he stumbled onto. And it's a niche format for us, but it's been a staple for him. And he's, I think, recruited a lot of Canadian folks. But Philippe has also played with us since the very beginning. He was in tournament number 1 as well, along with a bunch of other Canadians. So who's to say something about Four Horsemen is particularly interesting to those up north? All right, so you've got, in the video here, we've got, it says North semifinals on the text. That's kind of funny, but I believe it is, Philippe is on the, is he on the left and Peter's on the right? I don't recognize either of these playmats.
I think Peter's on the left.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I think he uses this playmat, but I thought it was maybe a Jace playmat in the past, but now looking at it up close, it's definitely an art I don't recognize. Okay, but
when he's at home, he always plays on the Richard K. Ferguson playmat that he has.
Yeah, but, and I don't recognize this. There's like this group of ladies in a bar in provocative attire. I don't recognize that playmat either. I know Peter.
Maybe these are just things that Philippe had at his place. I don't know exactly where they're playing or what the location is.
Yeah,
but,
I think you're right. I think they're at Philippe's house. I know Peter's got tons of playmats, including a whole giant stack of the Four Horsemen playmats. So I'm surprised he's not using that. Okay, so I think it's Philippe on the left, and he looks like he took a mulligan. And no shortage of drinks here. I'm sure that they've had before the match, and that will continue throughout if history bodes well for this tournament. Man, even at 1.5x, this seems to be kind of going a little slower.
Which is really funny because this video is only 30 some odd minutes long. So I think it's really interesting that it has such a slow start because it's not a very long match. So they must get into it here. Sure, I guess they're probably just talking.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of talking since it's in person and everything. All right, so what do we got going on here? We finally got a mount. We got a land plate. Exciting.
I think is it a volcanic island? Or
yeah,
is it a mountain?
Yeah, that's a volcanic. Okay, so
that's Peter on the left.
So it's Peter on the
There's
left.
There's a land tax from Philippe on the right. Turn 1. What you want to see?
Yeah. Now, given the fact that, I get the name. North semifinals is like Canadian Four Horsemen semifinals. That's what the comment is there.
Yes, those in the north.
Yes. So double land tax, chain lightning coming down from Peter. He doesn't want to trigger the land tax for sure. Another chain lightning. So right off the bat, Philippe's at 14. Now comes the game definer, right? Now that the Tundra Wolf is out there, this 1/1 creature for 1 mana forces your opponent. They have no choice. They cannot sit back anymore. They have to play lands now. And now the land tax will get double triggered for Philippe on the right here.
So Peter did play a factory, so he's at least got something to block with. It is interesting, though, that he fired off both of those chain lightnings, and now he doesn't have anything to remove, small creatures with on the other side.
Well, but he knows that Philippe doesn't have artifact destruction main deck, so he can block with that factory. Now, Philippe does have chain lightning, so Philippe could chain lightning after combat.
Or he could bloodlust his wolves to first strike the factory to death.
Yeah.
He does have a few, he does have some tricks up his sleeve, but we'll see. I mean, the factory is a fairly effective roadblock.
Yeah. Now Philippe could have double triggered land tax there. He could have gotten 6 lands out of his deck. And I don't remember exactly how many he drew. Looks like there's 1 land. There's a plains and a mountain in his graveyard, so I think he discarded a couple lands. And now Peter comes down with Old Man of the Sea, which is a just unbelievably great answer to Brassman and Tundra Wolves, because if Philippe doesn't have a chain lightning, Peter can now start stealing those creatures. He could steal that Brassman, and that would just shut down that Tundra Wolf right off the bat. And it actually
it's a very, very good answer to Philippe's deck. It's funny, I must have looked at the deck photo wrong, because I was thinking that the old men were in his board, but they must be main.
There's 3 in the main deck. That's right. There's 3 in the main deck, and there's 2 Falling Stars in the main deck as well, along with the chains and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. So he does have a 3-drop to kind of compensate for the lost slot of the Serendib that he's not playing.
Yeah.
Which I really like Old Man. I mean, Old Man's great, and in this format where we allow proxies, it's easy enough to play multiples. I mean, it's kind of an expensive card if you're picking those up, trying to not just complete a set, but have a play set for a deck.
Right.
but it's pretty good. And then there he's got a ghost ship. So I mean, that's ghost ship's yet another big roadblock. So I mean, looking at this match now between those two blockers that are out versus what they're up against, it seems like Peter's in a pretty good position.
He is. He's in a very strong position given what he's up against. But you saw here, it looks like Philippe discarded a ball lightning because he didn't have 3 red. And now he's double land taxing. He's got a plains, a mountain. Let's see, does he end up getting 6 lands? Because he might have a handful of lands already. The problem, though, is Peter, who we know helped Philippe work on this deck, has whittled Philippe down with 6 damage from those early chains. So, like you said, John, it's questionable whether that was worth doing that as opposed to getting rid of the weenies. But Peter knew he had answers for those weenies, so very smartly he's gotten damage in with those chain lightnings to try to discourage Philippe from playing the tax edge, the land tax, the land's edge world enchantment, because Peter might have a bunch of lands in his hand as well. Okay, so Spirit Link coming down on the ghost ship, and Peter taps the Old Man of the Sea and takes control of the Tundra Wolves and attacks with it. Interesting. And gets rid of it. Yeah. So he's just gonna attack and get rid of it, and now he can attack. Now he can get rid of the Brass Man next turn. He plays a second ghost ship. Wow. And now another full 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lands that Philippe is getting. So I assume here Philippe has a handful of lands. He's getting 5 more, and he's going to play a Land's Edge right here. Because if he needs 10 lands to deal 20 damage. So there it is. There's the Land's Edge.
Yeah, I mean, getting to double land tax 2 turns in a row is pretty gross.
Yeah. So does he have 10 lands? 1, 2, 3. 4. So he's doing 8 damage, bringing Peter down to 10. Was that 4 or 5? That must have been 5 lands.
I think it was 3 plains and a mountain. I think it was 4.
Was Peter at 20 or 18?
You must have been at 18. This is interesting. So Philippe's playing the Land's Edge, but he can't actually kill Peter.
Yeah, he can't. He can't seal the deal.
Does he
here.
only have 3 lands out? Is he going to get to tax again next turn?
Yes, Peter has 4 lands. So if Peter could find a way to kill his Mistress Factory here, that could balance things out. Philippe has 3 lands, so he's planning to double land tax again. Peter plays a 3rd ghost ship. And there it is, the double land tax for the rest of the damage. Wow. Yep. So here you're seeing the power of the Land's Edge land tax combo. All right, John. Let's get back to the deck photos and let's talk about sideboarding. Let's start with Peter's deck. If you're Peter, what are you going to sideboard here?
Well, it's rough for him because there's obviously no disenchant in this format, so you have to deal with Land's Edge in different ways. You either have to play another world enchantment to get rid of it, or you need to kind of play around their strategy so that they're not able to pull so many lands out of their deck. Or play something like Presence of the Master that will just counter it when they try to play it. But Peter doesn't have access to any of those things. So I don't think anything in his board's particularly good.
Yeah, I mean that's shocking, right?
Maybe you bring in the Detonate just to kill Brass Men, which sounds really funny, but maybe having two Detonates to pick off Brass Men wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's also got, of course, Falling Stars to kill weenies, and he's got old men to steal his guys, and he's got a lot of answers for the little creatures, and a lot of ways to block. So I don't think he's going to die to a ground assault. But he does have to figure out how to play around that Land's Edge, otherwise he's toast.
Yeah, agreed. Interesting. I'm going to switch back to the video real quick and show these guys. It looks like Philippe is actually showing the cards he's sideboarding. If you look in the video here, he's putting the active volcanoes like right out on the board. These guys know each other's decks backwards and forwards because they did a ton of play testing, and Peter helped Philippe with this deck. So I guess that's not a surprise, but interesting they're showing their sideboard cards. Let's go to Philippe's deck, John. What is... obviously, Philippe's putting in the 4 active volcanoes. What else would you recommend him putting in here? Is that it?
I mean, I think that's probably it. The King's not any good. The Blood Moon's okay-ish, but I don't think it's going to slow Peter down a ton.
Yeah.
And we didn't really see any artifacts from Peter. So, yeah, I think just the active volcanoes. I mean, I guess if he wants to try to play the cleansing instead of something else, that would be some more direct damage to be able to get in.
Yeah.
So he could bring in the cleansings if he wanted to.
Yeah, I think that the 4 active volcanoes is probably all he needs. What does he take out, though?
He could trim any number of places. I think he could trim that ivory tower. He could probably trim the Clergy of the Holy Nimbus if he wanted to. He could trim the Yidwin Ifrits. I mean, there's lots of places to trim because he really needs to focus on the Land's Edge combo itself.
Right.
To win this match, I think.
I would
because he's not going to be able to get through Peter's 2/4 flyers. They're too big.
I would trim the ivory tower and 2 Winds of Change, and maybe 1 Yidwin, and put in those 4 active volcanoes. All right, the guys are shuffling up here. Let's switch back over to the video. Really cool that these guys got to play this match in person. It looks like
I like it.
Looks like Philippe's taking a mulligan here.
I think that's fine. I mean, you want to have a fairly aggressive hand with this deck. So
well, that's the other advantage to land tax, right? You can aggressively mulligan with land tax to try to get your plains or plateau land tax in your opening hand, and you're going to recoup the cards by triggering land tax. You could even do it 2 or 3 times. Okay, so Peter's going to be on the play here, I guess. Philippe has mulliganed once. Peter on the left, Philippe on the right, and Peter starts off the volcanic, same as last game. And Philippe starts off with a brass man, not a first turn land tax. So he did not mulligan for land tax. Interesting. I would have thought that's why he was doing the mulligan.
He may have mulled to try to get one and then decided that he didn't want to have to mull again. You know, I mean, he maybe just felt like his hand was good enough.
Oh,
he did have. Oh, there's an ivory tower.
Yeah, ivory tower. I was recommending sideboarding that out, and here it is. Okay, so chain on the brass man. Gains 1 life from the tower. Goes to 21. Another brass man. Real chess match here. Flying man. All right. 1 point off the ivory tower for Philippe.
So it's funny, we talked about, not leaving the tower in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really funny because it makes that flying man
useless.
Super ineffective.
Yeah, it's
it can't block the brass man, and it also really doesn't do much of anything, only attacking for 1.
Right.
Because he's just going to gain that right back every turn.
Oh my gosh! So Peter chains the second brass man while Philippe plays another land tax, and now
and then a third brass man.
Holy crap! I mean, that's hard to deal with. I mean, and it's all on 1 mana. This is the genius of Philippe's deck. When you've got all these things that only cost 1, you can just sit there and force your opponent to trigger the land tax. Meanwhile, Peter discards a Primordial Ooze.
Yeah, it's interesting. So he must not have a super good hand because he's not willing to extend and let Philippe land tax.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just gonna take it from that brass man every turn.
Right.
And apparently discard and attack. And it's kind of a bad and futile mode of play to get into, because I understand that you don't wanna let them do their thing, but he can't run his deck on 1 land. So
right. Yeah.
You know,
I mean, what he's letting Philippe do here is just draw. It's unregulated draw. It's like almost like time walks for Philippe here.
So I guess I'm just trying to think about what cards is Peter waiting for that would be worth him playing another land, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is, because so much of the stuff in this deck costs 3 or 4.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't really have anything that costs 2, and so I don't know. This just seems like a bad place to be trapped.
It's a real bad spot for Peter, and we never see Peter in spots like this. Like this, I think this is the first time in all of Four Horsemen history where I've seen Peter trapped like this.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, he had gone on a real run, winning you know, several tournaments in a row prior to this one, and you know, to see it come to the line here where he's really just stuck.
Now
he's really, he's not able to do anything.
No, and meanwhile, Philippe's at almost 30 life. Did you notice here Philippe discarded the Spirit Link? He did not want to put the Spirit Link on the Flying Man because he knew that the Unstable could come down. What Peter's trying to draw into is an Unstable, but he's not getting it.
Yeah, no reason to. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he could have put the Spirit Link on the Flying Man if he really wanted to, but I just don't really see the value in it. Because Peter's not going to block with the Flying Man because it's just going to die.
I'm surprised he didn't put it on his own Brass Man, because then he'll gain life from that. Why would you discard it when you can put it...
He could have put it on the Brass Man instead of discard.
Yeah.
But he wanted to be able to untap the Brass Man. Well,
right.
I guess he'd still be able to untap it the next turn, too. Yeah, I don't know. He could have done that.
And now,
he could have played it on his own Brass
now Philippe's got so many cards in hand. He's got 7 cards in hand. He's. I mean, this. I just don't understand why Peter didn't just trigger the land tax, you know, early on and deal with it and move on. Like, because this is a guaranteed loss here.
Yeah, I just think he's so far in the hole now that he's not sure what you would even do it for. I mean, I don't know. He could play a land here.
Well, right here. Well, when Philippe has a full grip of 7 cards, it's fine for him to get more lands because he's going to have to discard them anyway. So I just don't understand why Peter's not playing into the land tax and just moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Because there's no way out if he doesn't play more lands. So I guess he's just resigned to the fact.
So this is just like a slow concede, is all it is.
More or less.
That's disappointing. Yeah, and Philippe's here still operating on 1 land. Maybe Peter was really had a lot of alcoholic beverages, and maybe he wasn't quite.
Well, I think he made a choice early to not play into the land tax until he found something worthwhile, and then he kind of just realized that it's just game over, right?
Maybe he was hoping he could draw his detonate. Maybe that's what he was hoping for, and get rid of the Ivory Tower.
Maybe I don't know.
But
I don't know.
This seems very unlike Peter. It's very confusing. I don't really understand, like, especially when your opponent has a full grip. You don't. If your opponent has 7 cards, it kind of doesn't matter if they land tax, right? Because they're going to discard that stuff. Yeah, he had lands. He had Old Man of the Sea. He had Sylvan Library. He could have, and he had Remove Soul. he could have really played this differently and just.
Well, he also had a detonate in his hand, so I mean, he could have played the Sylvan Library.
What?
And then he could have like detonated, one of the brassmen. I mean, early on he could have detonated the brassman. Was the only thing attacking him for a long time.
Yeah,
but maybe he didn't draw the detonate until later. I don't know.
I'm so confused. Yeah, Sylvan Library, detonate, remove soul, Old Man of the Sea. Those are actually all the answers he needs to pull back in the game. Wow. All right, well there you have it, folks. That is how the champion Peter, the King Suleiman Soltesz, went down finally. Out of all the tournaments he's played, I mean, I'm just in shock over here. I don't even know what to say. But I know it was a tough matchup, and I know these guys knew each other's decks very well, having done a lot of playtesting together, and it's really cool to see that they got to play the match in person. All right, so back to the brackets. So Philippe, congratulations to Philippe Bizian, who emerges victorious 2-0. Has Peter ever been 2-0'd? I think that's the first 2-0 in the history of Four Horsemen versus Peter.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think I've ever seen, never, at least not from a video match that we've ever commentated on. I've never seen a 2-0 victory versus Peter, ever. Wow. Okay. Well, quite the match. All right, so feel free to join us any Thursday night for all you old school Magic players out there. If you want to play some Four Horsemen, it's a really great format. Join us on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. CST, 9 p.m. EST. We've had a little bit of lull during the summer, but now we've got the Summer League fired up. So hopefully that will spark some new deck innovation. And we thank you for joining us for the tournament number 13 semifinals. John, thanks for all your commentary, and we will see you guys next time.
See ya.